Here are my top 10 books from 2023. That was the top year. In 2023, I set a goal for myself to read 23 books, and I exceeded that by quite a few. I ended up reading 41 books this year, which was a lot more than I expected. I thought I was going to struggle reaching 23 books, and I didn't. But I wanted to share my top 10 books from the year just because getting into a reading slump is kind of hard, and all of these books helped me get out of it. And so I wanted to share with you some of my favorite books. And in no order, these are just my top 10 favorite from the year. So the first book I want to talk about, I actually don't have the hard copy of because it is in my apartment in Maryland. I did not bring it home for winter break, but it is The House Across the Lake. This book is probably the best book I've ever read, not in 2023, just my entire life, like the best book ever. And I don't want to give too much away, but there are definitely a lot of twists and turns. And the story sets with this woman who lost her husband and kind of goes into a downward spiral. And so she's trying to like rehab at her family's lake house, and she's enjoying her time there. And she's starting to meet all the neighbors, and then one of the neighbors ends up drowning in the lake, and she goes to rescue her, and they kind of become friends. And then she becomes addicted to knowing more about this woman and who she is and her life, and she starts like stalking her kind of, and then she finds out all of these secrets. And I don't want to give too much away, but it's definitely a lot of twists and turns I never saw coming. And it is just such a good book. It kept me on my toes. I literally read it in 2 days, and I almost never read a book that quickly. I can normally just like read a chapter a day and call it good. But this book I needed to finish. I just kept needing to know more, needing to know what was happening. And it is so good. I rated it 5 out of 5 stars. I've become a little bit more picky with how I've been rating, especially on Goodreads, just because you can't give half points. And so giving it 5 stars really means I enjoyed the book. And for me, I like to rate 5 stars for something I've never really seen before, something that's different and unique. And this book is extremely unique with all of its twists and turns, and I highly recommend, especially if you're in a reading slump. This book was so hard to put down. So the next book is The Housemaid. This book is also kind of a mystery type book. It is about this woman who has a criminal past, and she's trying to start over, and she really can't find a job because no one wants a criminal working for them. And so she finds this job as a housemaid to this really fancy, wealthy family. And she's a live-in housemaid, and she kind of gets like a weird vibe from the family, and she's like, I don't really have any other options, let me take the job. And so you would think, being in this nice wealthy family working for them, she would get all of these nice benefits. No, she's living in their attic, and the door only locks from the outside, but she's like kind of weird. They're giving all of these like weird signs, but she kind of just has to look past it because she needs the job and the money. And so then all these secrets come out. She starts finding out weird things about the daughter and the wife and the husband, and eventually it all comes out, and you'll just have to read to find out more. But this book also really kept me on my toes. I think this book took me about 3 days to finish, just because I have a busy schedule, and so finding time to read is a little bit difficult for me. But I definitely think you could finish this in maybe 2 sittings, depending on how fast you can read. But this book was also super hard to put down. I just wanted to know what was going on, and I needed answers. And so I would highly recommend this book if you're ever in a reading slump, just because it is fast-paced and it's so good. And I'm really excited to read the second one in this series. I will let you know how that is. If you want to check out my Goodreads, I will try and update it as frequently as I can, or on my Instagram. I love posting stories about all the books I'm reading. I have a little highlight for each year so far that I've been reading books, so definitely make sure to check that out. Okay, so the theme this year was more so murder mystery and mystery books. The next book I have is Lies I Tell. I have seen a little bit of criticism from this book because it is a little out there, but I would say that's the same for almost any murder mystery or mystery book, just because they're fiction, so the odds of them actually happening in real life are very slim, but this one was super entertaining for me. This one wasn't as fast paced. It slowed down a little in the middle, but it picked up in the end and in the beginning. The two main characters in this book are, we'll name Woman A and Woman B. I personally don't like reading the backs of these books, so I'm trying my best not to give too much away. So Woman A is obsessed with Woman B because Woman B affected Woman A's life in early childhood, and now they're in the same town. And so Woman A wants to get revenge on Woman B, and Woman B is kind of like a bounty hunter type deal where she commits like financial fraud. And so Woman A wants to expose Woman B, but she needs to kind of get in, like an in to expose Woman B. And so Woman B kind of picks up on all of these things. And so eventually they find a bigger crime that is being committed, and it kind of exposes both of them. And it was just super entertaining for me. I love these types of books. While this one is kind of slower paced in the middle, I still really enjoyed it. I felt like it gave me kind of a break from just wanting so much information, and so I would definitely recommend this. This book is a little controversial. Again, another murder mystery type book. It is Where the Crawdads Sing. I do not stand by watching a movie before reading the book. I feel like it really dyes the imagination. However, that was the case for this book. I watched the movie first just because I'm a huge Swiftie and wanted to see the Carolina song, which I didn't know was only at the end credits, but that's a story for another day. I kind of already knew what was going on when I was reading the book, but the book goes into so much more detail than the movie. I feel like I had a lot of questions after watching the movie, but after reading the book, they were answered. And so I would highly recommend that. If you don't know the plot for Where the Crawdads Sing, it is about this girl who lives in the marsh, and everyone in the town thinks she's like a monster. Not really. She's obviously human, but they have so many questions about her because she was never really educated. She didn't go to school. Her family kind of abandoned her out there, and so she's really one with the ocean and the animals. And this boy comes along and kind of takes advantage of her, while there's this other boy who is actually like in love with her. And so in the end, one of the boys gets murdered. And so the whole thing about this book is trying to figure out, did she do it or not? And it's so good. I would describe it as each chapter is kind of like a past and present, which I enjoy reading. I love hearing the different perspectives. And so being able to have the reference of what's going on in the future and then having the story from the past really kept me entertained. And so I would highly recommend this book. I will say it is controversial because I'm pretty sure the author committed murder. So that might be why the story feels a little too real. But I really did enjoy this book, and I really did enjoy the movie, so I would highly recommend both. The next book is not murder mystery. It is a romance book. It is Confess by Colleen Hoover. I believe this is my favorite Colleen Hoover book ever. I love this book so much. I know on TikTok it doesn't get the best reviews. I just really like the different style for Colleen that this book gave. So the plot of this book is that there is a girl who is trying to figure out her life. She's not really sure like what's going on and like how to handle these things, and she needs money. And so she finds this art studio who is looking for someone to work for him, and just as like an assistant. And so she gets the job and she starts helping out, and he does all these like beautiful art pieces, and he does them with people's confessions. So people will write down a confession, and then he'll anonymously draw or paint an artwork for this confession. And so many people love how raw and authentic these pieces are. And then there's all this like drama and this like twisted tales, and it's super good. It kept me on my toes. I could not put this book down. It was amazing. I loved this book so much. I know a lot of people say it's definitely not their favorite Colleen Hoover book, but I loved how different this book was. It just was so intriguing. I just wanted to know more. I wanted to know more about all of the artworks and where the ideas were. And it's also interesting because there's kind of like a enemy type person that comes in and kind of like tries to destroy everything, and it just was so good. I was entertained the entire time. Next, we have another Colleen Hoover book. It is Heartbone. This would probably be my second favorite Colleen Hoover book I've ever read. I loved this story so much for no reason. It was literally nothing that interesting or special, but there was just something about these characters that really pulled me to them, and I loved this book. So in this book, it is about this girl who is living with her mom, and her parents are divorced, and her mom passes away, and she has to go live with her dad, who is quite wealthy while her mom and her were not. And so she goes and lives with him, meets his family, is kind of skeptical. They live in like a beachy town, and she finds this boy that she is interested in, and he kind of lies his way through the relationship, and eventually they get caught, and she figures out all of the lies, and he has to make it up to her, and it's just so good. The writing in this book is just amazing. The characters really just like draw you in, and I could not put this book down. It was so good. So this is the last Colleen Hoover book. This was the last series I read for 2023. It is Slammed. So I will say for this series, I did really like the first book the best, which is normally the case in a series. The second book was okay. It kind of helped expand the story. The third book I felt like was not necessary at all, and it was really hard for me to read, but I managed. And so I will say that before reading, if you want to read the series, the first book is the best, so just know that going into it. And once I start a series, I need to finish it. And so for me, this is about a girl who has lost her father, and her family has to move from Texas to Michigan, and her next door neighbor is this really cute boy, and she has a brother, he has a brother, the brothers become friends, and they go on this first date, but then they find out that they can't be together, and so the rest of the story is them trying to figure out how to be friends and just not have a relationship. But there are so many twists and turns that come where they like have to figure them out together, and they're forced to be friends even though they need space from each other, and it's just so good. It's such a cute little story. I really enjoyed it. I just did not enjoy the rest of the series. So I will say there is that if you want to get into the series. If you don't feel like you have to finish the series, I would highly recommend this book. But if you feel like once you've read the first book, you need to read the rest, I would not recommend this book. But I will say it was super cute, and I just really enjoyed the story. And so it was really hard for me to put this book down. The other two books I put down wasn't as intrigued in, but this one was just so cute. The next book we have is Every Summer After. This book was so popular on TikTok, and I read it in the summer, so it was just perfect. It's a little romance love story type book. It goes from lovers to enemies to lovers, and it's just so cute. I will say there were a couple turns that I didn't see coming, and so it was a very, very entertaining book. It's about this girl who had a childhood crush and like teenage romance with this boy, and they had a falling out, and so in the end her mother passes away, and she's brought back to their summer lake house, and they both reconnect and have like a very repulsing relationship where they don't want to see each other, but they keep getting drawn back together. They keep running into each other, and eventually they have to come to a truce, and then the story continues on. But I don't want to give too much away because it is definitely a very cute book, and it was really hard for me to put it down, especially in the summer, because I love reading a good summer beach book on the beach in summer. So I would highly recommend this. It was a super fast read. It's not too long, and I feel like it gets right to the point, and there aren't very many like slow spots. So I would highly recommend this book. The next book I have is The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. This book was all over my For You page in the middle of the year, and I gave in. I was like, I have to read this book. I need to know what it's about. However, I did read Daisy Jones and the Six. That was my first Taylor Jenkins book, and unpopular opinion, did not like that book at all. I was not a fan of the story or anything about that, so I was a little intimidated to read this. When I tell you this is one of the best books I've ever read, I would say it is second to The House Across the Lake. It was so good. It's a mystery. I would classify it as like a mystery book. It had a lot of turns I did not see coming, and everything about this book is just so good. So it's about this girl who is a reporter, and she gets asked by Evelyn Hugo, who is a big movie star who's had 7 husbands, and everyone wants to know why her relationships haven't worked out, but she hasn't talked to anyone about it, and she's kind of stayed out of the press. And so she asks her for a little autobiography, and she explains everything to her, and everyone wants to know why she picked Monique, because Monique is not a very famous writer. She's only had a couple of like blow up articles, and so her team is very confused and they want to make sure that they're getting everything they can out of Evelyn so they can become the big press. And so it really just explains the story of Evelyn Hugo, which I found so entertaining. And then at the end, there are a couple twisted turns that most people don't see coming, and it was just so good. I always wanted to know what was about the next husband, why she picked Monique, what was going on, and this is just so hard to put down. It's another quick read, and I just really enjoyed this book. The next book I have is, again, another Taylor Jenkins book. It is Malibrise. I feel like I've really embraced my Florida roots and have become obsessed with the beach, and so having this book about surfing and a little California family was super entertaining for me. I just loved how this book was set up. It had kind of the present and the future, and then the next chapter was like the past, and it looked back on what was going on in the present, and it was just so good. The story is about a family who is now very wealthy for modeling and surfing, and it's about all of these siblings, and it kind of explains where they are now and how they got there and what really drew them into surfing and their family, and they've all kind of like broken apart and now they're being brought back together, and it's just such a good read. It was super quick to read, and the story is just so entertaining. You need to know like what's on the next page, and I was just obsessed with this book. So these are the 10 books I recommend that I read from 2023. They are all page turners, and I could not put these books down, and I truly did enjoy them. I have started some of my 2024 books, so if you want updates on that, I definitely recommend checking out my Goodreads or my Instagram on my stories, because I will update both of those immediately after I finish a book. But I'm super excited to see what I'm gonna read this year. And if you're looking for a page-turning book, I recommend all of these. But that is it for this video. If you liked it, please give a thumbs up and subscribe if you aren't already, and I'll see you next time.